One of my earliest memories growing up at the age of 10, my parents and brothers and sisters at 2, 3 a.m. in pitch dark with howling winds, branches of trees flying, crawling through grass and weed and trees to reach the safety of a secure home. That night felt endless. When I woke up the morning after, we looked outside and the settlement looked like a war zone.
Daylight revealed the extent of the damage caused by the velocity of the tearing winds that crashed the length of the peninsula.
1 in 2 homes ceased to exist. Floodings across whole villages that had never been flooded before. People spent the whole night on the rooftops waiting for the water to recede. You realize at moments like this, you can't do much alone to get the community to stand up on its feet again. Everyone have to pitch in. By the time I reached university and then went on to become a scholar teacher at the University of South Pacific in Fiji, I had figured out that something was very deeply wrong. One, that the cyclones were occurring in Fiji and of course across the Pacific with much greater frequency. And second, they were also occurring with far greater intensity. We didn't quite understand the mechanics and the science and the physics of it. But we understood that there was something that was happening across the globe. We are looking at supercharged cyclones that had been transformed. At the other end, the seas have been slowly rising. You do not see it happening on one night and over 1 month period, but you only feel it over decades. Salt water intrudes into the flatlands. The flatlands are where our agriculture is situated. This is where our societies are. The irony of climate change is that its deepest and sharpest impacts are on the islands. The Pacific Islands have contributed less than 0.001% of greenhouse gas emissions, and yet the impact of climate change, of global warming, of sea level rise is the harshest, deepest, and most substantial on these economies. In the 1980s and 1990s, we began advocating on the international environment for the unique challenges that small island states faced. And we found that a very constraining environment. It was difficult to break through, and we found ourselves on the margins of most of the global discussions in the colonial and in the post-colonial period. The Pacific has centered on this narrative of smallness, deliberately designed to even further disadvantage us. The views of people in these small countries did not matter. That was deeply ingrained. The other side of the smallness was one of domination and of control. First came the whalers in the 1800s. Then the miners, for example, the phosphate miners in Nauru. A whole country was mined out. Then the tuna industry exploiters. People may not know that most of the nuclear testing in the world took place in the Pacific. Across the Pacific, the equivalent of 11,000 Hiroshima bombs have been tested in the air, in the waters, and underneath the seabed. As a student, I was blessed to meet Professor Haufer. He examined this idea of smallness in great depth. He said that the oceans do not separate these small states. The ocean unites us by culture, by language, by migration over the years. And so started a new wave of thinking about the Blue Pacific as a large oceanic continent. He flipped the whole idea of smallness.
We still have to swim in the global world. But there's an area, there's a space that is ours. We must create this space that are ours.
It was fundamentally transformative. It now defines the way in which small island states across the Pacific, their leaders, their scholars, their civil society, the way in which they think about themselves in relation to the world, and the way in which they analyze the problems and challenges that they find themselves grappling with. The way in which Pacific Islanders think about the Blue Pacific. They are stewards. They are not owners of these oceans. They hold the oceans in trust for future generations, ensuring that it remains sustainable, it remains healthy. Islanders know very well that they need to provide leadership globally, because many of the factors, many of the variables which impact upon the sustainability of the Blue Pacific are factors that are outside in the external world. And by far the largest and the gravest global challenge we face is of climate change. Across the Pacific, we were making some progress, but we were losing all our human development progress each time a cyclone, a storm, a major flooding took place. It wiped off decades of development. And so we realized we had to bring climate change into the development discourse, because there is no way small states could make some progress for 4 or 5 years, lose it all, start from a lower base, make some progress and lose it all again. This is no way for human civilization and societies to make progress.
There are less than 400 weeks left of the 20th century. Time is short for us to rectify the present unsustainable patterns of human development.
We were so happy that through our advocacy, when the Rio conference took place in Brazil, that climate change was brought into the heart of the global development discourse, and that this could not be ignored.
We come to Rio prepared to continue America's unparalleled efforts to preserve species and habitat.
The survival of human existence, as well as that of other species, is threatened and endangered.
This was the very first time that countries across the world agreed that climate change was a global problem and that you needed a global framework to deal with climate change, because individual countries could not.
We cannot be complacent unless the agreements reached here are accompanied by real commitment. We simply are headed for a moment in the 21st century where the condition of our species may become terminal.
This framework had been established, so we could argue the case. We could sit in the same room with the global decision makers and say that international development must factor in as well climate change, because climate change has outsized impact on all areas of human development. Being in these rooms, then being able to advocate, being able to show and share the data, being able to inspire scientists to understand this phenomena, that was a very significant moment.
Ladies and gentlemen, you are here today to write the script for a new future. A future of hope and promise, of increased prosperity, security, and dignity for all.
And so the next major milestone was the world agreeing in Paris to the 1.5 degrees Celsius temperature goal. That had it not been for the Pacific's sustained diplomacy over the preceding nearly 3 decades and activism, that the 1.5 would not have been secured.
We in the Pacific did not cause climate change.
We are not the cause.
The climate bill has finally come due. Who will pay?
We will now have a treaty that commits us all to taking climate action and to keep the world within a target of 1.5 degrees Celsius temperature increase.
This can be done. We have the knowledge, the tools, and the money.
It provided the world with a target to focus on. It also provided the world with understanding in the science why this target of 1.5 was so crucial.
A world that is worthy of our children, a world that is marked not by conflict but by cooperation, and not by human suffering but by human progress.
For the Pacific, it is a major compromise, even 1.5 degrees Celsius, because even at that we stand to lose so much of our land-based economies.
L'accord de Paris pour le climat est accepté.
We're going to begin with the states of emergency across this country, and now here in New York City, a state of emergency declared as well. Tonight, more than 1,300 people sickened in the U.S.
Coronavirus now classified as a public health emergency.
New York, California, Illinois, and Connecticut all ordering non-essential employees to stay home.
In March 2020, I was Fiji's ambassador to United Nations based in New York. Cities and whole countries began to shut down, people working from home. Transportation substantially reduced, air flights almost ground to a halt. We saw something very interesting. We saw that the greenhouse gas emissions had taken a substantial dip. What dawned on me is that we can do this. If there were a will, we can do this. If we all got together, we can do this. Fundamentally, transformatively reducing greenhouse gas emissions is possible. The most recent of the milestone is the IPCC report declaring a code red.
The United Nations and this assembly were created precisely for the kind of challenge that brings us together today. The climate crisis is a code red for humanity.
A code red for humanity.
The report from the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change warns the Earth will hit its tipping point earlier than expected.
The UN report says at this point we are not able to stop global warming for at least 30 years. Essentially, a hotter future is already locked in.
No part of the planet was left untouched this summer. We are now operating in an environment that we have to accept has already been changed. In the Pacific, we have now entered into the overtime zone. All the actions that we thought we could take over 2 or 3 decades, we have to compress them, and we have to take these actions much more substantially within this decade. Adaptation measures must be measures on scale. Mitigation measures must be measures on scale. The time and that era for small pilot programs, for tinkering on the margins, for slow incremental change is gone. We need significant, bold, large programs that reach scale in much shorter periods of time, such as 3 years and 5 years, rather than over 10 and 15-year period. The most substantial impacts of climate change are felt by these states across the Blue Pacific. What should Pacific Island be saying to G20, the 20 largest economies who contribute something like 80% of the greenhouse gas emissions, and who also have under their control 80% of the world's economy? First, that the G20 itself should accelerate, speed up its own mitigation measures, because without much speedier progress in G20, everything else that the island states will be doing and the other countries will be doing will be lost. Decarbonizing sectors of the economy, decarbonizing food systems, applying the digital innovations. Second, that G20 has the financial resources to finance adaptation measures on scale that is needed. And third, their message is that G20 should bring to market and make available the finest of technologies to all countries. All of these things put together, we are back to a fighting chance. But it is not in that direction yet. It is not in that direction yet because what is missing is the political will. As a Fijian, I do not wish onto other countries what has become a lived reality already for us. We are relocating communities already, and people seem to think that it is easy for communities to move. It is very, very hard. People's rights to land and ocean and seas are grounded to a very specific geography, and that does not move. Before you move homes, you have to acquire lands, build schools again, you have to build health centers again, you have to extend the water and electricity and roads and all the other human infrastructure that makes life livable in the new places. If you thought that all of those things I've described was not already difficult enough, try moving a church, try moving people's burial grounds. We are undertaking this. We do not wish this to be the reality for other communities, and in this code red and overtime zone, we have to get this right. Tuvalu now has to imagine not relocating individual communities, but Tuvalu will be below water by as early as 2070. And so Tuvalu has to now imagine this future. And one of the things that it has amended in its constitution is that Tuvalu will continue to exist as a state regardless of the sea level rise. These are not theoretical discussions, these are actual practical discussions that are taking place. Tuvalu and Fiji and the Pacific Islands are canaries in the coal mine. They kind of signal what lies ahead. At 1.5 degrees Celsius temperature increase, we are already looking at millions of people needing to be relocated, and in some cases whole countries needing to be relocated. When you begin to factor in 3 degrees Celsius increase, then the numbers go exponentially up. Around 500 million people in countries such as Bangladesh, Indonesia, across Asia, across Africa, and in the US and Europe as well. What lies beyond 1.5 can have catalytic and hugely disruptive, highly unsustainable outcomes for humanity as a whole. Where do we find ourselves? We find ourselves at probably the halfway point of the overtime zone. What we are called to do is to take all the actions that we can take as individuals, the choices in what we buy as food, how we travel, what can we do as families, what can we do as communities, what can we do as cities, as towns, what can we do as countries, what can we do as businesses, that all of these things put together, we get back to a winning ticket. In this overtime period, this is what is called of us.